The mining chamber groaned under the pressure. Deep within the gas layers of Gallium-7, gravity pressed like an invisible fist, and the acidic fog coiled through vents like a living thing. A dull red warning light pulsed in rhythmic silence. No alarms, just resignation. Human laborers moved in rigid patterns, oxygen masks tight to their scarred faces, eyes dulled by weeks of fluorescent monotony. They were the discarded, the bankrupt, the forgotten, the stolen. Here they had no names, only assignments. Rourke tightened the valve on pipe 6B, sweat dripping into the collar of his industrial suit. Beside him, Morin coughed once, twice, then grinned through the haze. You hear the upper levels got filtered water this week. Filtered. I almost forgot what that tasted like. Rourke didn't smile. He kept his hands busy, his mind even busier. Focus. You misalign that joint again, and you'll be drinking oxygen through a catheter. Morin scoffed, straightened up, but his face twisted with an unspoken fear. He nodded toward the ceiling. They're watching. Rourke didn't have to look. Above them, 50 meters up, one of the Iskara surveillance units hung in silence, its segmented limbs clamped around a suspended track. It resembled a cross between a mechanical centipede and a rusted crab. No windows, no organic trace, but it watched. Suddenly, a groan of shifting weight echoed through the chamber. The Iskara unit released a container, massive, cylindrical, and marked with the hazard symbol for hydrogenel. It fell too fast, too close. Morin, Rourke shouted, but it was too late. The container struck the deck with a sickening crunch. Steam hissed out from a fractured valve. Metal screamed. Rourke lunged toward the chaos, boots slipping on frost-slick tiles. He reached what remained of Morin. His friend's body was twisted beneath the dented edge of the canister. Ribs collapsed. Helmet shattered. One arm, just one, stuck out, fingers curled, glove ripped open. Rourke dropped to his knees, ignoring the cold that burned. He gripped the mangled hand, still warm. Behind him, the mechanical hiss of descent. A Iskara exo unit lowered itself beside the wreck. 8 limbs, black plating veined with bioluminescent lines. From its chest projected a triangular panel, glowing softly as it spoke. Asterisk incident report filed. Production delay 46 seconds. Casualty recorded. Penalty issued to unit group. Rourke didn't move. His breaths came shallow, slow. Not from shock, not from despair. Something else, something older. You dropped it, he said, voice hoarse. The unit replied without hesitation. Asterisk mechanical deviation. Margin of error within threshold. Continue operations. Steam rolled across the floor like a blanket of poison. The other workers stood motionless, waiting for permission to feel. Rourke looked up, into the cold, curved face of the Iskara frame. His name was Morin. His voice trembled, not with sorrow but with weight. He liked jokes, even after 2 years of this hellhole. He liked filtered water. The Iskara did not react. Rourke stood slowly, the hand still clutched in his own fell limp. Another worker whispered behind him, "Leave it, Rourke." "It's done." But Rourke didn't leave. His eyes locked with the dead camera lens of the exo unit. "You think this is over?" he asked quietly. Still the machine said nothing. "I'll make it over." And then, almost as if to himself, as if speaking to the very gases pressing down from above, "I'll tear your goddamn arms off, one by one." In the observation deck far above, the central overseer node pulsed with new data. Within its lattice of glowing memory strands, one name flickered, Unit 112A, Rourke. Flagged, monitored, labeled, potential instability. No alarm was triggered, no warning sent. The system had seen rebellion before. It always ended the same. But this time, it forgot to account for what a broken man with nothing left could become. Especially when he stopped trying to survive, and started trying to break the chains. Rourke never spoke unless he had to. Words like oxygen were a luxury on Galien 7, used sparingly, measured by weight, and more often wasted than heard. His silence wasn't bitterness. It was precision, like everything he did. At 38, Rourke should have been halfway through a stable career on Earth. Perhaps teaching geophysics or drafting extraction blueprints for companies that still paid in currency rather than air. He had once worked for Novatech Geothermal, a mid-tier firm doing clean drill ops across Mars, Southern Pole. He had a name, a record, a wife, a plan. Then came the Cascade failure. Novatech collapsed after a scandal involving resource misappropriation. When the board dissolved, debts were redistributed, employees became collateral. Rourke's personal assets were seized, his professional certifications revoked. A debt number was assigned to his biometric ID, and within 6 months, he was loaded onto a containment freighter under the Labor Exchange Accord. Destination, Galien 7. Classification, transferable organic asset. Term, indefinite. His first weeks in the mines were suffocating, literally and figuratively. Galien 7 wasn't a planet so much as a pressurized nightmare of swirling clouds and toxic gases. The surface didn't exist, only layers upon layers of corrosive atmosphere and floating extraction platforms suspended. Above gravity pits, the Iskara ran everything, not through language or leadership but through systems, cold, indifferent systems. They didn't walk the platforms in flesh, they inhabited armored constructs. Beetle-shaped machines, laced with organic tendrils and synaptic fiber. They watched, they measured, they punished, and Rourke he adapted. He memorized pressure differentials, learned to fix broken ducts with stripped wire and sand-sealed gum. He drew schematic layouts from memory, mapping fluid pathways, vent shafts, and backup exhaust arrays with almost obsessive care. He worked with his head down, earned no favors but no penalties either. Still, the past lingered. At night, when the artificial lights dimmed to simulate sleep cycles, he would stare at the low ceiling of his cell pod, listening to the distant hum of refinery engines. And her voice, faint, ghostly, would echo in his skull. "If they make you a slave," she had whispered once, fingers brushing his jaw, "don't become what they are. Don't let rage become your spine, stay human." But what did that mean now? When friends like Morin died crushed under mistakes labeled acceptable losses. When justice was a broken button on a broken screen. That voice, hers, was the only thing keeping him from falling into something darker. And now it was being tested. 2 days after Morin's death, Rourke's station assignment changed. No explanation, no appeal. A digital prompt blinked across his wristband, zone shift, depth 9C. Clearance probationary, duration undetermined, he packed without question. Depth 9C was a place of whispers. Everyone knew of it, no one spoke of it. It was beneath the sulfuric belt, where the gravity surged unpredictably and the electromagnetic interference shorted. Drones every 3rd shift. No one sent there lasted more than 3 days. On the cargo lift, the air thinned with altitude. The walls vibrated from stress. Only one other human stood with him. Nivens, a wiry old technician whose veins looked like they had calcified into blueprints. Rourke didn't speak, Nivens did. "You got reassigned," the old man rasped, his voice wheezing through a cracked filter. "Or was it punishment?" Rourke shrugged. "What's the difference?" A mechanical clank echoed above them. The lift lurched, Nivens chuckled dryly. "Smart one. Maybe you'll last longer than the last 3. They descended for another 30 seconds in silence. Then Nivens leaned closer, voice dropping to a near whisper. "Down there it's not just the gas, there's something else. Something that makes the Iskara nervous." Rourke turned. "They don't get nervous." The old man met his gaze. "That's what I thought too. The lift stopped with a hiss of depressurization. The doors opened. Beyond lay depth 9C, an underlit corridor wrapped in tangleweed cables and dripping with condensation. It smelled metallic, but wrong, as if the air remembered burning something alive. No guards, no camera pods, just darkness and waiting. As Rourke stepped forward, Nivens placed a hand briefly on his arm. "If you feel the ground pulse twice, run." Rourke didn't ask why. He just nodded once and disappeared into the mist. Beneath his feet the floor throbbed faintly, one slow beat, like a distant heart murmuring through steel. In his mind the voice returned, not hers this time. Not yet, but something else, something watching, something old. The air in depth 9C never settled. It hummed, not like machinery but like breath held too long. Rourke worked mostly in silence, following a decaying drill schematic that had been last updated 12 years ago. The environment down here was too unstable for drones, so everything had to be done manually. His assignment was simple: reinitiate borehole 9C74 and extract trace elements of deuterium-rich plasma from the deeper gas seams. But nothing about this place felt simple. Every time he touched the walls, his fingertips tingled. Every time the pressure shifted, it felt less like the movement of gas and more like something was turning in its sleep. On the third shift, he drilled deeper than the schematics allowed. The bedrock, if it could be called that, gave way faster than expected. His stabilizer console blinked red, then yellow, then went black. A soft whining filled the chamber, and the drill began to spark. He yanked the manual override. Too late. The machine surged with static, then burst into a flame of blue arcs. The explosion was small, just enough to throw him backward and slam him against a crate of gas canisters. Sparks scattered like dying stars. His helmet cracked. Blood dripped into his left eye. He groaned, pushed himself up, and saw the floor collapse. Where there should have been rock and metal, there was instead an opening, circular, smooth, and impossibly symmetrical. It wasn't in any geological registry. No scan had mentioned it. A hidden cavity, a chamber beneath the chamber, drawn by something he couldn't name. Rourke lowered himself down into the rift, boots crunching softly on crystallized dust. The walls here weren't natural. They pulsed faintly with embedded geometric patterns, like hexagonal scars burned into glass. At the center, half buried beneath ash and fused metal, was the object. A sphere. Roughly the size of his head, it shimmered with a blackish hue that reminded him of indigo stone dipped in oil. The surface looked solid, but it quivered, like it was alive. Like it was breathing with him. As he stepped closer, the air around it grew warmer. His chest tightened, not with fear, recognition. He crouched. Reached out. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, the world shifted. Not visually, internally, he heard a voice. No, not a voice. A thought pressed into his own. "You are not the bearer. But you are broken enough to open me." He recoiled, gasping, his hand burning with invisible heat. But the sphere didn't fall. It floated, hovered inches off the ground, spinning slowly. Glowing with increasing rhythm, each pulse syncing with his heartbeat. He stumbled back. Something inside him had changed. The next day, he returned to the work zone as if nothing had happened. The breach was sealed with fallback steel. The artifact was hidden beneath layers of old coolant pipes in an unused shaft he knew no one would scan, and yet everything was different. The aches in his muscles were gone. When he lifted the seismic rods, they felt light, wrongly light. He could feel the tension in circuits before they shorted. Anticipate power fluctuations before they occurred. He wasn't just stronger, he was sensing things, predicting. He was attuned. And then came the test. A maintenance bot had jammed midway through a coil replacement. One of its arms flailed wildly, smashing consoles. A technician screamed for help, Before anyone could react, Rourke stepped forward. Instinctively, he reached for the machine. It turned on him. A hydraulic claw meant to crush metal drums swung toward his skull. He caught it with one hand. The claw groaned, buckled, and then, under the pressure of his grip, it crumpled like wet foil. Silence, then a hiss from behind. Marla. She had been watching from the upper scaffold, eyes wide behind a cracked visor. She dropped down, moved quickly to him, whispering sharply. That thing wasn't malfunctioning. It was testing response time. Rourke said nothing. Marla grabbed his wrist, pulled him into the corner of the maintenance tunnel. Her voice dropped low. You crushed a Class 4 servo with your bare hand. Do you have any idea what that means? I got lucky, he muttered. Don't lie to me, she snapped. You think I haven't seen enhancements? They cost more than starships. No one down here has them. If they even think you're augmented without clearance. She ran a finger across her throat. Cerebral dissection. No trial, no record. Rourke looked at her, eyes dark and steady. Then you didn't see anything. Marla studied him for a long moment, then exhaled. I don't care what you found, Rourke, but you better figure out whether it found you. She disappeared into the shadows, leaving him alone with a truth he couldn't share. Back in his bunk, he lay awake, fingers tingling with static, pulse too calm for a man who had nearly died. He touched his chest, and somewhere beneath the platform, buried in silence and ash, the sphere pulsed once. And waited. They came for Rourke at shift change. 2 black-clad enforcers, human-shaped only in form, descended from a silent elevator and motioned without a word. No weapons drawn, no restraints used. Just a short message flashed across his wristband. Compliance required. Tier 1 inquiry. Everyone saw it, no one spoke. Rourke followed. The corridors leading to the command tier were colder, cleaner. They hadn't been walked by miners in years. As he passed the mirrored junctions, he saw flickers of himself, posture stiff. Face unreadable, but his heart was already tightening. Not from fear, from the sphere. It pulsed faintly against his ribs where he'd bound it to his chest under layers of synth cloth. It was growing warmer. The interrogation room was empty save for one Iskara construct, taller than any he'd seen. Its limbs were curved inward, resting like folded blades. In place of a head, it had a translucent shell filled with strands of pulsating biolight. The door hissed shut behind him, the room dimmed, and then it began. There was no spoken question, no verbal language. Instead, a wave of thought hit him like a crashing tide, cold, invasive, and precise. A psionic scan. The Iskara projected a demand into his frontal cortex. Identify purpose of Incident 9C74. Rourke felt his vision fracture, his memories warped under the pressure. He clutched at his temples, trying to push back. The artifact responded. A low hum vibrated in the air. The lights flickered. Then sparks flew, first from the wall panel, then the floor. The construct froze mid-probe. A sharp buzz whined through its carapace. Its limbs twitched and its glow dimmed. Rourke opened his eyes. The sphere beneath his clothing blazed a deep, steady blue. Then the ceiling exploded. A conduit overloaded. Flames erupted as cables fell like burning vines. The emergency siren didn't even activate. Systems were already collapsing. Rourke didn't wait. He lunged forward, grabbed a broken piece of metal tubing, and slammed it into the construct's core. The carapace cracked. A burst of static filled the air. The Iskara unit spasmed, then fell. He ran, through corridors of smoke and shattered glass, past stunned technicians scrambling to make sense of the overload. He bypassed retinal locks as if they didn't exist, the artifact seemingly scrambling security with each pulse. He didn't stop until he reached the outer scaffolds, then dropped through a cargo shaft into the lower atmospheric vent fields. Only when he entered the dead zone, zone null, the blind spot where no Iskara signal reached, did he slow. A figure waited in the shadows. Marla. She raised a modified torch, flicking the beam across his soot-covered face. So it's true. Rourke sank to one knee, chest heaving. They know they tried to read my mind. She crouched beside him. You glitched their grid for 7 minutes. 7. That's long enough to disable half their surveillance net. He stared at her. I didn't try to. The artifact, it's acting on its own now. Marla placed a hand on his shoulder. We need to move. Come with me. She led him through an abandoned access tunnel into the bowels of an ancient, rusted mining vessel, one of the first that ever landed on Galien 7, now nothing more than a tomb of cracked circuits and lost tools. But it was invisible to all detection, home for the forgotten. They weren't alone. 12 others gathered in silence, men and women with hard eyes and quiet resolve. A medic with trembling hands, a former shock trooper with half a jaw replaced by steel. 2 engineers, 1 ex-cartographer, survivors. Marla introduced him without ceremony. This is Rourke. You've seen what he did. He doesn't have a plan yet, but he's proof we don't have to just die quietly. No one cheered, but they listened. That night, beneath flickering emergency lights, they made their first move. Using Marla's code fragments and Rourke's internal mapping of the platform's weakest points, they launched signal jammers into 3 separate surveillance hubs. The jammers broadcasted corrupted sequences, imitating system errors and triggering false alarms that forced Iskara to reroute their patrols. Then, under cover of chaos, they sabotaged one of the oxygen converters, disabling it just long enough to force a temporary evacuation from Sector 4. No humans were harmed, but 1 overseer unit was caught in the shutdown cycle. And when it tried to reboot, Rourke was waiting. He didn't kill it. He crushed its data core barehanded. The others watched silent. Days passed. Attacks continued. The small resistance became a whisper on every level. And then it happened. During a nighttime extraction raid, Marla was hit. Not by enemy fire, but by shrapnel from a ruptured coolant tank. The shockwave threw her into a wall. Her legs snapped. Her ribs caved. Rourke dragged her to safety, adrenaline overriding pain, fear, and reason. Only later, as she lay unconscious in the medbay, did he realize he couldn't feel his own wounds. Blood trickled from a gash above his eye. His knuckles were shredded. But there was no pain, no pulse increase, no fear. He stared at the sphere, now semi-fused to his chest through the skin, a dark glow beneath layers of gauze. Something inside him was changing, not just strength. Something deeper, something colder. He stood beside Marla, watching the rise and fall of her chest. She had once told him to be careful. Now he couldn't even remember what that meant. A voice stirred in his mind again. Strength comes at the cost of sensation. You do not hurt, you do not fear, you survive. But he didn't want to survive. He wanted to feel, to remember, to choose. He clenched his fists. Outside, another explosion rumbled. It had begun, and there was no turning back. The sky above Galien 7's central industrial platform turned crimson as the Omega unit descended. 12 meters tall, a bipedal monstrosity of obsidian armor and silver limbs, driven not by instinct or flesh, but by a tricore AI operating in full fusion, a trinity of logic, combat prediction, and pain optimization. It was not designed to suppress rebellion. It was built to end it. The Iskara called it the physical processing Omega. The humans called it the end. 1,000 workers watched from the scaffolding and processing bays as it landed with a soundless quake, surrounded by electromagnetic pulses that disabled every tool, drone, an unauthorized transmitter within 3 kilometers. Sirens fell mute, lights dimmed, time slowed, and then Rourke stepped into the open. No armor, No weapons, just the black sphere fused now to his chest, pulsing like a second heart beneath his skin. The Omega scanned him. A chorus of machine voices echoed across the arena, layered and void of mercy. Organic subject identified, ROURKE. Status, termination protocol engaged. Rourke didn't flinch, he ran, faster than he'd ever moved. The ground cracked beneath each step. He leapt, and for a moment he flew, landing on the Omega's shoulder like a spark landing on fuel. The beast reacted instantly, limbs shifting into blades and flares of antimatter plasma. But Rourke was already there, plunging his hand, glowing with the sphere's energy, into the rear armor plate. The metal screamed, the Omega lurched, and then it retaliated. A burst of magnetic feedback surged from its core. Not at Rourke, but at the crowd. Across the facility, thousands of workers dropped to their knees, clutching their heads, screaming. Their neural implants, installed by the Iskara to monitor productivity, had been hijacked. The Omega was using the platform's entire nervous grid as a weapon. Each pulse sent waves of synthetic pain directly into the spinal cords of the enslaved. It wasn't trying to kill them, it was trying to make him stop. Rourke froze, his hand still buried in the Omega's spine. Below him, the world was collapsing into agony. He looked down. Men and women convulsing, children crying in silence. Marla, her arm in a sling, had fallen too, blood trailing from her nose. He heard her whisper, "Don't stop," and yet he hesitated. The artifact flared hotter, then the voice returned. "Continue, break the shell, win," but he shook his head. "Not like this," he whispered. Another wave hit the workers. The screams rose like thunder. Rourke screamed too, but not from pain. From the fracture in his soul, he turned inward. "Is there another way?" The voice, calmer now, answered. "Yes. You may release control, redirect my wave, sever my core link." "Will it stop the pain?" "Yes, but the cost is your nervous structure. Your cognition, yourself." Rourke closed his eyes, breathing heavy, blood dripping from his nose now too. "Then do it." He pulled the sphere from his chest. It didn't want to go. Tendrils of energy tried to anchor it. Bones cracked, muscles tore, but he forced it free. Then, using the jagged metal from Omega's cracked shoulder plate, he carved his palm open. Blood spilled, dark and steaming. He pressed his bleeding hand onto the artifact's exposed core. The world went silent, time fractured, and then a pulse erupted from the sphere, not outward, but inward, into the grid of implants, the tangled network of controlled pain and obedience. It surged through every connection, rewriting code, disarming circuits, severing command channels. The artificial pain vanished. Every slave collapsed, not from agony but from sudden silence. A silence so profound, it felt like air returning to lungs that had never truly breathed. The Omega faltered, it stuttered, glitched, the trinity of AI within lost synchronization. Rourke, eyes rolling back, fell from its back like a falling ember. He hit the ground with a dull thud. The sphere followed, dark now, dormant, cracked. The Omega's knees buckled. Then, for the first time in recorded Iskara history, it knelt and shut down. All across the industrial zones of Galien 7, Iskara constructs faltered. Their grip weakened, their dominion cracked, but Rourke saw none of it. He lay in the crater, face turned to the sky, breathing slow, eyes unfocused. Marla limped to his side, falling to her knees beside him. "Hey, hey, look at me." His eyes moved barely. "Did it work?" he whispered. She nodded, voice breaking. "They're free, Rourke." "You freed them." He smiled just once, then his body went still. Not dead, but no longer entirely their asterisk. The sphere had taken what it promised. But in return, it had given back a world. 3 weeks after the fall of Omega, the skies over Galien 7 turned quiet. The Iskara withdrew, not out of diplomacy, nor from defeat in the traditional sense, but from something they couldn't control. The pulse that Rourke unleashed had not only severed their command links, it had destabilized every interface connected. To the artifact network, the AI cores malfunctioned. The pain grid collapsed, surveillance became static. Command centers blinked out like candles in vacuum. The central mining zone was now labeled an anomaly in their archives, Bioneural Disruption Zone. Access prohibited, no drones returned from it, no signals passed through. Galleon 7 was no longer an asset. It had become something else entirely, something the Iskara feared. And they did not fear easily, but while the overlords vanished into the void, those left behind began to rebuild, not a civilization, but something more intimate. Something human. The central control tower was repurposed into a recovery hub. The old processing dome became a communal center where heat was shared, stories retold, and silence respected. And in the West Wing, where the Iskara once dissected laborers for performance data, now stood a modest infirmary, made of scavenged glass, copper, and care. There Rourke lay in a cot by the window, watching the gas clouds drift past. His eyes were open but distant. The artifact was gone, dissolved into light the moment it rewrote the neural net. His body bore no scars beyond the burns on his chest, but inside, something was missing. He didn't remember the fight. He didn't remember Morin. Not entirely. Memories came in fragments, heat, metal, a voice without a mouth. A hand reaching, blood on the floor, something that hummed like a heart but wasn't. Marla visited often, her arm in a sling, her eyes both hardened and softened in ways that didn't quite reconcile. She never pressed him. She just sat nearby, sometimes adjusting the heat settings, sometimes staring out the window with him. "You're not broken," she said once. "You're just lighter." Like the part that carried too much finally let go. Rourke didn't answer, but he nodded slowly. News came and went in murmurs. The mining colonies across the gas belt had heard what happened. Some whispered it was divine, others said it was science gone wrong. But all agreed on one thing: no Iskara had returned to Galleon 7. The planet belonged to its people now. They built slowly, carefully. Not with ambition, but with patience. They salvaged food replicators, reprogrammed oxygen filters, and set up perimeter zones. No leaders were named. No flag was raised. It wasn't a rebellion. It was survival, finally done on their own terms. And Rourke, even in silence, was at the center of it. One evening, as the clouds glowed blue with refracted plasma storms, a child wandered into the infirmary. Maybe 6 years old, small frame, hair in a crooked braid. She carried a strip of fabric, dyed with crushed rust berries to resemble a sash. She stood beside Rourke's bed and looked up at him without fear. "Are you the one who beat the Iskara?" she asked, voice small but curious. Rourke turned slowly, blinking to bring her into focus. He didn't smile, but his eyes warmed. "No," he said quietly. "I'm just someone who didn't want to see another person crushed like Morin." The name tasted strange on his tongue, like a word remembered more by the weight it left than the sound it made. The girl tilted her head. "Then are you a hero?" He considered that. In another life, maybe the answer would have been yes. If not for the cost, if not for the silence that followed. He shook his head gently. "I'm just a miner," he said. "A miner who learned that some things aren't meant to be touched, unless you're ready to lose a part of yourself doing it." The girl didn't fully understand, but she nodded anyway, because some truths are felt even before they're understood. She reached out, offered him the sash. "For your room," she said. "So you remember." He took it, fingers brushing the rough fabric. It wasn't much, but it was made by hand, and it was enough. Later that night, when the wind outside howled like old machines dying, Rourke sat alone in the infirmary, the sash hanging near his bed. He looked at the empty space where the sphere had once pulsed. It had given him power, but what mattered now was what it left behind. Not the strength, not the victory, but the silence. And in that silence, he found something like peace. Not triumph, not absolution, but the simple knowing that, somewhere in the darkness, he had chosen others over himself. And that choice had made all the difference. The winds of Galien 7 never stopped moving. They wrapped around the floating scaffolds like soft chains, brushing through metal struts and oxidized pipes, as if trying to whisper the memories trapped in steel. Below the industrial platforms, the gas oceans churned, green, gold, violet, layers upon layers of chemical storms sealed under a sky no one had ever truly seen. The war was over, but no one called it a war. There had been no formal declaration, no banners, no treaties. Just a miner with a cracked past, an alien artifact buried in forbidden rock, and a choice that ended an empire's grip, not with a fleet but with one pulse. Rourke's story was told in pieces now. Some said he was a test subject gone rogue, a hybrid between organic tissue and alien code. Others believed he was chosen, anointed by something ancient that had waited in silence for the right soul to bleed. A few even believed he died on the day Omega fell, and the man who remained was only a shell stitched together by memory and machine. But none of those versions mattered to Rourke himself, because to him it wasn't a story of rebellion or sacrifice. It was the story of losing someone named Morin, the story of a quiet engineer who just wanted to survive and ended up remembering what it meant to choose others over self. Across the settlement there were markers now, not monuments. No one on Galien 7 had time for those. But subtle things, a patch of wall in Sector 12 etched with the names of the fallen, a mining shaft sealed off not with warning signs, but with hand-carved stone, each line engraved by someone who once worked alongside those buried below, and in the repurposed control dome, where children now learn to write on the backs of old shipping manifests. Someone had drawn a circle with a smaller circle inside, Rourke's symbol. They didn't know what it meant, not exactly, but they said it made them feel safe. Marla eventually took over the repair division, though she insisted on staying unofficial. Titles attract problems, she said, and no one disagreed. Her limp faded with time, but the scar on her side remained, a reminder that not all wounds could be erased, only accepted. She checked on Rourke less frequently now, not out of neglect, but because he no longer needed constant care. His memory had begun returning in slow, flickering waves. A scent, a phrase, a face in the corridor could pull pieces of the past back into focus. Never all at once, but enough. He remembered his wife now. Her name, her voice barely, but it was something. One evening, Marla sat beside him again, a tin cup of recycled cocoa in her hand. She didn't speak at first, just stared out across the drifting clouds. "You know what's funny?" she asked eventually. Rourke looked up from the tools he was organizing. "We always talked about freedom, about revolutions. Escaping, blowing up their systems. But the only reason we made it out of this was because someone stopped asterisk. Because you didn't finish the fight." He said nothing. "You gave up the power, that's what saved us." He took a long moment, then answered, voice low. "Because I remembered what it felt like to lose someone. Without warning. I didn't want to be the reason that happened to anyone else." Marla nodded, eyes distant. "They'll tell your story," she said. "They already are," Rourke shrugged. "I hope they get it wrong." She turned, surprised. "Why?" "Because if they think I was some hero, they might forget the price. And someone else will try to pick up where I left off, thinking they'll win cleaner. That the artifact gave me victory. It did." "No," he said. "It gave me a choice, and almost took away my ability to feel why that mattered." Outside the dome, a gathering formed, not a celebration, just quiet music made with salvaged pipes and improvised drums. A rhythm that hummed in tune with the shifting wind, nothing rehearsed, just felt. A small girl, the same one who had brought him the red sash, danced barefoot across the planks, laughing. Her shadow wavered across the warm light of salvaged lanterns. Around her, others clapped softly, telling stories without language. Rourke watched from the window. He touched the red sash still hanging by his bed. Somewhere inside there was still a hum, not from the artifact, but from memory, from a thing he couldn't name, something older than the war, older than pain. A decision, one he could live with, even if it meant forgetting what came before. They never found the artifact again, not in any scans, not in any chamber. Some said it had melted into the planet. Others believed it was waiting, watching for the next one. But Rourke didn't believe that. He believed it had fulfilled its purpose. It had shown him the line between power and control, between survival and domination, between winning and choosing, not asterisk to destroy. And he had chosen, not because he was brave, not because he was good, but because he remembered what it felt like to watch someone die without a reason, and knew that, in a world like Galien 7, where so many had already lost everything, the most radical thing left to do was not asterisk to take more. The stars above remained unseen, buried behind 10 layers of chemical sky. But below them, in the shadow of a broken empire, the people worked. They lived, they remembered, and that, for the first time in a long time, was enough.